So thank you again for coming and joining us today. For those of you who this might be your first time at one of our SGA meetups, my name is Ben Abraham. I'm the Research and Standard Lead at the SGA. I wrote a book called Digital Games After Climate Change that explored the sorts of impacts that games are having on the planet and what a sustainable games industry might look like. I've been a researcher in games and sustainability for probably getting on close to a decade now. And I'm super excited to be joined by two fantastic speakers today to talk about pragmatic ways we can optimize energy efficiency and also improve the experience for our players. So a little spiel about the SGA. We are a non-profit member-owned cooperative run by and for the games industry. The SGA produces and maintains an open source standard for games businesses to measure and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, informed by real development experience of our members and scientific best practices from the sort of cutting edge field of sustainability. We're also building a network of sustainability professionals and sustainability-minded game developers to disseminate knowledge and best practices, simplify the job of reporting and compliance with different regulatory frameworks, and in general, accelerate the green transition. So today's session is all about optimizing the energy efficiency of games, which I think is a fairly new and novel practice, though I also want to connect it to some of the historical practices and ways that the games industry has operated in the past. And I'll start today with a little brief overview that will just, a couple of minutes before we hand over to our main speakers. Energy efficiency is clearly a major focus for those of us who care about sustainability and keeping the planet within safe limits. But it's not just a benefit for the planet. Increasingly, we're starting to see that it's also a benefit for players as well. Some of the optimizations we're talking about today can improve the experience by extending battery life, not just in how long it lasts, but also in reducing the amount of wear and tear on it. Batteries, after all, are a consumable component. And can reduce things like heat-induced slowdowns, reduce fan noise, and a topic that's important to me in Australia, which is often a very hot climate, keeping our devices cool in the summer as well. So to discuss this topic, I'm joined by our fantastic speakers who have experience with some of this, and I also want to note some of the people in the audience who are also very experienced in this topic. But our speakers are Hauke Thiessen and Ash Fulton. Hauke is a technical artist at Deck 13, currently working on an unannounced project. He previously worked on several VR projects and for Limbic Entertainment on the theme park game Park Beyond. His main responsibility is ensuring that artist game vision shines and runs smoothly on every supported platform. However, ensuring a high frame rate can get a bit boring, so he tries to improve game technology in other ways as well. Our second speaker, Ash Fulton, who'll be mostly directing conversation and responding to Hauke's presentation. Ash is a co-founder and creative director of Bold Beetle Games, working on the physics platformer Dung Slinger, which I just found out about recently and sounds very fun. They started working on games at 13 years of age and created mods and unreleased games of different sizes. The game that led them to form a studio started as a student project and got nominated at the German Developer Awards, and just recently received state funding. Congratulations, Ash. As an up-and-coming game developer of the next generation, they have an active interest in making the games industry sustainable, as I'm sure most of us do. And because they feel if they don't care, well, who else will? So that's our fantastic speakers today. I already went over this. Yeah, sorry, I probably should have had this slide up for the intro, but yeah, this is the SGA, and welcome. We're super pleased to have you here. Our agenda, I'm just going to give a really short rundown of some of the history of game optimization, and then I'll hand over to Hauke for his presentation on some of the research he's done recently from a train experience on the way to a conference, I think, which actually inspired the decision to have this meetup. And then we'll get questions and a discussion going from Ash, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. Yeah, so if you have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or hold on to them to the end and we can kind of discuss them in person then. So my very potted, very short history of game optimization, I want to put it on a line from FPS to energy, right? So if we think about the long history of making games, a lot of what happened in, say, the 80s and 90s as the games industry professionalized and became a large industry was working within the requirements of hardware, optimizing for things like shader pipelines, getting your number of polygons on the screen within realistic limits, getting the most out of hardware. And so optimization was often tied to the graphics and engine, but it wasn't just that. There was like netcode and other things as well, and that's like kind of been a current through all of the history of the games industry, optimizing on this particular way. And it's usually the case, or has been the case, that the hardware itself has set those limits, that sets the maximums that we can kind of aim for, that we can work within. And it wasn't really until the sort of mobile era, maybe there was a bit of it during, say, the Game Boy era, but I think, again, the hardware itself didn't use a lot of power. Um, but yeah, we obtained this ability to optimize and measure for energy when devices or gaming devices got batteries. Um, I haven't seen any evidence of like DS game energy optimization, but yeah, if it's out there, please send it my way because that'd be fascinating. But when we were optimizing for mobile development, we got all these tools because it was a really important UX pain point. Using too much power on your phone drained the battery. I remember using some of those early apps on the iPhone 4 and just immediately being out of battery in basically like an hour or something. And that's a really bad user experience. You end up with a really warm phone that you then have to put away in your pocket. Yeah, other apps have really poor performance. So iOS and the other platforms introduce these things to track and identify the energy consumption, the things that are causing excess usage of it. More recently, we've gained the ability to measure it on console and to a lesser extent on PC as well and optimize that. And that's a lot of it thanks to the Xbox real-time energy measurement process. Which has an on-device ability to look at the power at very, very granular levels, and we can optimize for power usage now. The result of that was the eco modes, which we saw announced at GDC, I think it was 2023, really like, a big burst onto the scene, this huge development. The main focus there is lowering graphical elements to reduce power. That's things like resolution, frames per second, and there's big savings to be had across games that have big player bases. We saw Fortnite save the equivalent of a small wind farm just by introducing some of these optimizations at the software level in things like menu screens where graphics don't matter as much. Where else? Where else can we find those optimizations? I think that's an interesting question to ask. The main thing that I wanted to kind of point at in this discussion, though, is that these are fairly non-intrusive. They're really quick and easy to implement. It doesn't really transform or change or challenge the kind of games or expand the type of games that can be made. An alternative current to that has been approaches that look at a more constrained design space that use the limitations of hardware or energy as a kind of alternative approach to the design of games. Pardon me. I ran a workshop in 2019 with some game design students at Abertay University with a scenario we just sort of cooked up looking at resource scarcity and thinking about, all right, what kind of games would we design if we didn't have access to power constantly? If we had to adapt to the intermittency of renewable energy. And so we came up with things like asynchronous play that changes either with characteristics of the game, depending on how much sun is available and things like that. Or that maybe processes your commands as the kind of energy becomes available. And then more recently, we've got examples of Solar Server and Sunblock One from kind of researchers who are interested in, again, using this design space of constrained energy. We can also excavate another history to this kind of approach, which goes back to the demo scene in the sort of 80s and 90s, looking at the sort of heroic feats of software engineering. Usually, these were really focused on optimization for things like file size or what the hardware could kind of do. But I think it's in the same tradition that we can also view, all right, what can we optimize for energy today? And so, yeah, using old hardware as well is another way to. I've seen examples of people. There's a recent game that I was made aware of for being developed for Game Boy Advance as a kind of low energy hardware platform that someone's been using. That's not always going to be true, right? We've got updated hardware sometimes uses less energy with the ultra efficient chips and things, but yeah. That's too much for me now, so I'll just end with a couple of questions and hand over to Hauke. But basically, I've still some unresolved questions. Does software level energy efficiency and savings get cannibalized? Is there a way that we can do it that doesn't get cannibalized and eat into those sorts of gains we've found? If measurement of energy is about what enables those reductions, what do we do for the platforms that don't have those measurements built in yet? What's our approach? And then lastly, most of our optimization so far assumes that players reject too much energy intense optimizing interventions. But maybe that's not always going to be true, and maybe there's some audiences that are more open to change. So anyway, that's slightly on a tangent from the rest of the conversation, but just things to maybe keep in mind for the discussion. So I'll now hand over to Hauke and let him tell you all about the practical tests he's done and the things he's learned about energy optimization.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'll quickly share my screen for this. If anyone could point me to the right button, that would be awesome.
You should let me just make sure that
There
we've
should be
got.
a green share button in the bottom middle of
Oh
the
yeah,
Zoom.
it's so obvious that I just glanced over it. Okay. Now you should be able to see my screen.
Yeah, yeah, that's appearing
Okay.
now.
So yeah, so this part of the meetup, this talk is called Pragmatic Ways to Improve Your Game's Energy Efficiency. So I'm a tech artist in my day job. So I'm already optimizing games, but usually I only care about FPS and mostly just about like the minimum FPS, and that's the only metric that really matters. And recently I also got interested in optimizing other things like battery life. I have a Steam Deck, and on long train rides, sometimes when I don't have a power socket nearby, the battery life can get quite critical. So I started looking into optimizing energy efficiency. Um, and I want to highlight this pragmatic in the title because I think everyone working in game development knows how it works. So you start really optimistically. You have all these ambitions and ideas of all the features that you want to have in the game. You have this nice plan and you start developing. And then after a few weeks, months, after a year, you notice, oh, actually, there are more tasks on my list now than when I started this. And every single task is a bit more complex than I anticipated. And very soon, your planning board looks like this, and you notice, oh, I'm already over budget and over time, and I still have so much things to do. And then you have to cut features, you have to cut corners to still release your game. And at that point, you basically do whatever is necessary to just release anything. It's not, I mean, it's not always that dramatic, but sometimes it is. So at that point, you have to cut corners. And sadly, that means that very often power savings aren't especially high on the priority list. So they are the first things to go. And that means that if we want to optimize our energy efficiency, we have to find solutions that are either very fast to implement so that we can still squeeze them in even if the schedule is really busy. Or we need to find solutions that also have other side effects, other benefits, so we can still argue in a production meeting, hey, this will need some time, but this will also improve the game experience. This will also increase battery life or avoid overheating and stuff like that. So these are basically the two strategies that we can use. Another challenge when it comes to this topic is that, so I already talked about how my day job is already optimizing games. And you would think that reducing the number of calculations in a game would also improve the energy efficiency. And that is true, it reduces the power consumption. But this is still not energy optimization, I would say, because, and I like this comparison here. Let's look at how accounting used to work in the 50s. So in the 50s, accounting was done using these mechanical calculators where you would like punch the buttons and then you would pull a lever and then it would give you some numbers in return. And this is how you did accounting. Obviously, nowadays, accounting works very differently. You have laptops, you have Microsoft Excel, you have databases, you have all kinds of specialized software. So accounting nowadays is like 1,000 times more efficient than it used to be. Still, accounting is still a full-time job. There are still people who do it 8 hours a day. So the same is true for performance optimization. We can optimize all we want. Artists will always find ways to add more polygons or ray tracing or whatever. So this is not really a way to save energy in any way because every saving is used for new features. So when you want to optimize for energy, we need to optimize things that don't get eaten up by new features. So this is a really important distinction here, that just reducing calculations won't necessarily improve our energy efficiency. Okay, let's start with the actual process. So I want to talk about my process, how I approached this topic, and then I also want to share some of my findings. So on the first thing that I did when I started looking into energy optimization was, okay, I need to, I was figuring out how to measure this stuff. And this is really quite easy. You can just get a power meter. They are really cheap online. You can just order one right now. It will arrive tomorrow. You can plug it into your power socket, then you plug in your PC or device or console into the power meter, and then you can measure the power consumption. It's really that easy. And you don't need something fancy because you are only interested in noticeable optimizations anyway at this point. So if it's not super precise or if it doesn't have fancy features like a rolling average, that's okay. Step 2, especially important for laptop users like me, is to make sure that you're not just measuring the charging rate of your laptop battery. So make sure your laptop is charged and you have any energy saving options disabled. Also important in the summer and also important in Australia, I guess, don't profile on very hot days because many devices will just reduce the clock speed if they notice that they are close to overheating, and then your measurements are completely off. Yeah, so don't do that. And then step 3 is you just come up with some ideas how to optimize stuff. You try out these optimizations. You look at the power meter. I have mine here. And then you just measure the impact. You write down your results. That step is important. And then you're done. So, and I did exactly that. And here are some results. So my first optimization were frame limits. So just to scare you a bit here, this is a screenshot from the first Witcher game from 2007, I think. And this game on a modern PC can easily get like 600 FPS because it has no VSync options in the game. There is no frame limit. So on a modern PC with a 60 Hertz screen, we just throw away 9 out of 10 frames, which is obviously a huge waste. and completely insane, to be honest. So you should definitely have a frame limit. Historically, there are many games that just added a VSync option and thought, okay, VSync is enough. This is not the case anymore because modern screens use up to 240 hertz. So for example, my laptop has a screen that supports a refresh rate of 240 hertz, which is insane for games because most games are like 60 FPS and that's on good days. So if you have a 240 hertz monitor, that means that you just have an uncapped frame rate and the GPU just renders as many frames as possible, resulting in a very unsteady frame rate. So even if you have in some seconds, like after 200 hertz, next second you only have 60 again. So it's not even improving the gameplay experience. So this is why you should definitely add an adjustable limit. Depending on genre and game, different limits are suitable for different players. So it needs to be adjustable. It's really easy to implement in basically every engine out there. And here are my results. When I tested this, I used Baldur's Gate 3, which is a relatively recent and popular game. So I just had my power meter plugged in, and then I enabled a frame limit. And you can easily see, it's really simple, just limiting the frame rate to 60 FPS already reduces the power usage quite a bit. And then limiting it to 30 FPS improves the efficiency even more. At 15 FPS, you get into this area of diminishing returns because at that point, most of our power is not used for the GPU, but for like the CPU and stuff that's not frame rate dependent. But like the initial savings from 60 or 30 FPS are really high. And as I said, it's really easy to implement. It's actually so easy to implement that when I wrote a blog post about this topic, 7 hours later, I got a reply from a guy who was like, "Oh yeah, I read your blog, really interesting. I added a frame limit to my game." So 7 hours after publishing this, I already had a game that added a frame limit just because of this article. So I think this really shows how easy it is to do once you decide that you want to do that. So frame limits, I think, are the most important optimization. Now we get into the more specific and obscure optimizations. And this is one I like, but it's very specific. It hopefully someone here in this meeting or someone watching this video can use this because it's very specific. So OLED screens consume less power for darker pixels because they need to emit less light. On modern laptop screens, that can easily be 14 watt, so significant amount. And that's why adding a dark mode to your game can actually improve the efficiency. Sadly, most games are not just menus, but have an actual game world. So it's not something you can do in many games. But for example, if you're working on a football management game, adding a dark mode could actually be a big improvement. And players like dark modes anyway. I work with programmers every day and they absolutely love dark modes for any software. So there's definitely an audience that would actually appreciate this optimization. And by the way, I didn't measure this because I don't have an OLED screen. So yeah, sorry. So another optimization that I could test myself was optimizing the menus. So in most games, when you open the pause menu, as the name implies, the game is paused, the menu is open. Still in the background, the game world is rendered every frame, even though every frame is identical to the frame before. So the obvious optimization here is to just disable world rendering. Unreal has a function for that, for example. Other engines probably also have that. So you just disable the world rendering while the menu is open. And I did test this in the Unreal Lyra example project. If you're not an Unreal user, that's just an example project. It's basically a multiplayer shooter. And it's really nice for testing stuff like this because it resembles a modern game, an actual game. So that's nice for testing. And here, just by disabling world rendering in the menus, this saves like 35%. Like that's a rough number, but it's significant, so it does make sense. Now, maybe your game works a bit different, especially multiplayer games. For example, they don't pause the game, obviously, while you're in the menu. So maybe you can do this. But then again, maybe, and this is something that many games do, maybe you blur the background while the menu is open. Actually, the Lyra project does this. So while the menu is open, the background is blurred. And there, my initial assumption was, wait a minute, if we blur the result anyway, why do we need to render it at full resolution? So again, very easy implementation, just reduce the screen percentage of the renderer while the menu is open. Even reducing to like 10% didn't make a noticeable difference because the result is blurred anyway. And in the Lyra example project, again, I got close to the initial saving. Now I got a saving of like 31%, so still huge. And again, no noticeable impact. To me, that's always important that we don't reduce the visual quality with these optimizations. And then we come to my favorite optimization of all optimizations that you can do. And that is to save energy when no one is watching. So we all know that we are not just playing games in our lives, we are also doing other things. And very often we do that while the game is still running in the background. So we start playing the game, then we get a phone call, we get to the kitchen to get some snacks, whatever, we fall asleep. So very often while a game is running, no one's actually playing the game or even looking at the game. And detecting these opportunities for optimization is actually quite easy. So I guess most people here in this meeting are old enough to still know about screensavers back in the day. And screensavers are a really simple feature to implement. You just add a timer, and then every second you count up. And as soon as any input is noticed, you set the timer to 0. But once the timer reaches certain thresholds, you can then apply any energy optimization. It can be really aggressive. So you can reduce the resolution, limit the frame rate, reduce image brightness, pause the game, whatever makes sense in your use case. It can be really aggressive because the assumption is that the player isn't paying attention anyway. I didn't test this myself because all these optimizations are already things that I tested the earlier approaches, like limiting the frame rate and reducing image brightness. I already discussed that. So you already know that this works, and the timer is relatively easy to add. There are actually some nice examples out there of games already doing that. Fortnite does it, not very noticeably. The Elder Scrolls Online. I actually noticed that recently that even the first Life is Strange game does that, which is what to me was surprising because that was like released now 2013, so it's quite old by now. And in that game, when you don't touch the controller for a few minutes, it just switches back to the main menu, so it doesn't render the world anymore, which is really nice because it helps to save energy, but it also makes sure that you don't miss anything. So, for example, if the cutscene is playing and you don't, or if something is happening, you won't miss it. So yeah, that's actually quite popular. Another optimization that I want to talk about, even though I couldn't test this myself in that sense, is the support for low-end devices. Ben already mentioned that this can be a really useful optimization, and I really want to drive home the point that like how much this can save on modern devices. So, for example, a PS5 uses more than twice the energy than a PS4 does. So if you are working on a game and you are wondering, hey, maybe you should also release this game for the PS4, if that's an option, that can save more energy than any optimization that you can do in your actual game. And if you release the game for the Switch, or if you optimize it so that it runs well on the Steam Deck, the savings get completely insane because these devices use almost no energy compared to like the big devices. Earlier, I mentioned like the two strategies to energy optimization, that you can either optimize in a way that is very easy to implement, or you can find a more complex solution that has other benefits. And this falls in the second category because it is a lot of effort and it's a big decision to also release on another platform. But at the same time, it can also like give you a new audience, a new target group that a new group of people that can play your game. So if you are in the position to make a decision like this, this can really make a big difference. And when I talked to this about colleagues recently, I got like the feedback, yeah, but the game we are working on, that's way too complex and too good looking and too advanced. We couldn't release on the last console generation and stuff like that. And to that, I would say that most games are way more scalable than you would think at first. And very often when people say, oh yeah, this game is only possible on the PS5 or it would only be possible on the PS6, that's like not entirely true. And there are many examples of games that were scaled down to work on older or lower end platforms. Oh yeah, didn't mention the PC because the PC is the worst offender, at least big gaming PCs. Laptops are fine, but these big chunky beefy pro gamer PCs, they can easily use 500 watt. So that's yeah, an entirely different discussion there. Yeah, so for example, the last Star Wars Jedi game was originally only released for PS5, and then later also released on PS4, because apparently if you are ready to make a few compromises, it's actually not that difficult to port a PS5 game to the PS4. Same is true for something like Doom Eternal, which was ported to the Switch, which was considered an almost impossible port, but it can be done if you're ready for some compromises. It's an option for most games out there. So yeah, next steps. If you learn anything from this, if you take anything with you from this, get a power meter. It can never hurt to have one in your flat. Then just start optimizing. And if you do that, please share your findings, because when I started looking into this topic, I didn't find that many resources, tutorials, or advice on this topic. So please, everyone who could share their findings, this would help like everyone out there. And also all the big engines out there, Unity, Unreal, Godot, CryEngine, all the big engines that are available, they all accept pull requests. So if you figure out something, an optimization that would help others as well, please consider creating a pull request for that, because optimizing one game is like one thing, but if you can get this optimization into one of the big engines, then potentially this optimization will help like not just your game, but like hundreds of games. So this, when it comes to efficiency, there's nothing better than just improving engines in general. Yeah, with that, I think that was my last slide. I think we are in time. Just for people who are interested, I have linked here my blog where I wrote about this topic initially. And I actually found that only after writing the initial blog post, Microsoft has some nice material on their sustainability initiatives, and there are some really nice case studies about Halo Infinite and Fortnite and Minecraft. Some of these optimizations discussed there are super specific, and like I'm not sure about every optimization discussed there if it's really that useful, but they are all interesting. So this is something that you can check out. Yeah, and that was really my last slide. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Hauke. Wonderful, wonderful bit of insight. Maybe we'll hand over to Ash now, and yeah, you have some questions for us. You can lead us out.
Yeah, for sure. Because you've presented us some really good catch-all solutions that we can basically slap onto every game. But what I'm interested in is getting to talk to you about where we can go further from here. Because like a lot of optimizations are very specific for which game I'm making. Like some games are really slow, so they might not need as high a frame rate. Other games are really fast, but then they might not need maybe they can live with a low resolution. But what part of the hardware can I specifically look at if I'm looking for the most practical energy efficiency? Where can I optimize the most?
As you said, depending on the genre, this can be very different. What piece of hardware?
Yeah, what component of the hardware? So the CPU, the GPU, the RAM.
For games nowadays, it's definitely the GPU. CPUs are often quite bored by modern games because there are CPUs out there that have like 16 or 30 cores, and even very well multi-threaded games don't use all the 16 cores all the time. And if you look at the power consumption of modern GPUs versus CPUs, the GPU is on top always. So the GPU has the bigger potential. That being said, I think the CPU often has untapped potentials that are not optimized because it's not needed. So for example, if you have a game and you have your game thread, your render thread, they are critical. And then you have like an additional worker thread or an additional thread for some like AI video encoding other threads. As long as these are not the bottleneck, they usually don't get optimized. When it comes to like easy games, optimizing CPU performance can actually make a bigger difference because the GPU is optimized anyway. Like this is what we are doing every day in the game development. We try to optimize the GPU performance as much as possible. But it's relatively easy sometimes to find a CPU thread that is doing stuff all the time that is not needed. But because not all cores are used anyway, it's not noticeable in the frame rate. So I guess even though the total power consumption of the GPU is higher, if it comes to savings potential, the CPU is maybe the first place to look.
Oh, thank you. And how does energy optimization change with the production pipeline? Are there any easy things or pitfalls that I can avoid at the beginning, or any features that I can squeeze in at the end? Is there any development there?
I mean, in general, optimization comes later during production. So it's very difficult to do that in the beginning, also because in the beginning you don't even know what your bottlenecks are going to be. So yeah, it's usually something late in production. I think when it comes to like when we are talking about the size of your project, of your team, of your company, there are these easy optimizations like adding a frame limit or I don't know, just adding a low resolution mode, stuff like that. That is easy to implement. And this is the stuff that smaller studios should focus on. And then the more complex ones should probably only be approached by bigger companies. So there are, for example, certain optimizations that I don't have a specific example in mind when it comes to energy optimization, but in general, there are certain technical topics that I would always leave to Epic and Unreal. So I'm working with Unreal day to day, and there are certain topics where I know, okay, this is so complex that personally, if I would work on this for just my project, it wouldn't be worth it. So this is where I just hopefully know that Epic, for example, is working on that. Same is true for other engines. There are certain topics that you can't really approach as an individual small company.
What sort of topics do you mean there? Is this like specific ways that a rendering engine works or something and talks to the GPU or something? Could you give us an example?
Okay, now it's difficult to find a good example relevant for energy optimization. But in general, for example, when you use Unreal, you should better use Nanite and potentially not you don't need to use Lumen, but like that's the stuff that the engine gives you. And if you don't want to like basically customize your engine and write stuff yourself, you should use these features because that's like the intended way to use the engine. So if you come up with a different way to handle like geometry, different than Nanite, I would question if this would be a good way to go, because the chances that your implementation is better than the one that is provided by the engine, that chance is very slim, because I had discussions with people about that, because some people tend to underestimate just how important big scale testing is sometimes for stuff like this, because if something is used by thousands of people every day, you can know that the number of bugs is going to be lower compared to any in-house technique.
I just wanted to point out the comment that Daniel Jacobs made in the chat as well. I don't know if you want to read it out, Dan, or if you're happy for me to do it. But basically, he says that on console, the GPU uses approximately a quarter to 1/3 of the total budget of the console. So starting there is always an excellent beginning. The power measuring tool on Xbox uses the GPU as the primary indicator for what's going on with the rest of the hardware. But this is Dan's comments continuing. You'd be amazed how many times we see games fully max out the GPU in a menu, but only use half of it in gameplay, which is, yeah, very, very interesting. For those of you who don't know, Daniel Jacobs is on the Xbox sustainability team and is one of the leads involved in bringing us the sort of eco modes technology. So fantastic to have you here. Thanks for the input.
Thanks.
I actually want to pick up on the theme of the eco mode, because hearing that word is very much, in Germany, you have a label for vegan food, and that label has now been proven in a study to make consumers want to buy it less. So in a way, an eco mode can be can signal, oh, maybe I'm getting a worse experience here because I'm putting climate change first. But how can we maybe sell that idea of energy saving and optimization better to players to make them understand this is not just a benefit for the environment, this is for you?
That's a good question and a big question, and I don't have good answers for that. Personally, right now, I would say don't add an eco mode. If you optimize your game's energy optimization, just do it. But don't put these optimizations in eco mode, because, as you said, many people like there are these so-called gamers who are proud of being gamers, who are sometimes really paranoid when it comes to their experience, and they get easily scared if they get the feeling that they may get the inferior experience. I guess the question is, should you cater to that? But personally, I would not. Like, I'm not someone who likes to argue with stupid people. So yeah, I think like the easy way is to just apply your energy optimizations. Don't put them in eco mode. Just let it be the one mode the game runs in.
Interesting. I was thinking too about sorry, I will get to you in a second, Maria. The question of branding, and I think too there was some research that Unity did with I think it was the Yale Climate Communications Research Center a couple of years ago, which was a survey of 1,000 gamers in the US, and it found even back in 2022, again, these things do change. They might have changed for the better or for the worse. that a majority of players were agreed with the statement that the games industry should address its own emissions, has some responsibility for it. And if eco modes are a way that we do that, then I think maybe the resistance that we see, yeah, I'm not sure what the conclusion is from that, but I think that there's some kind of, yeah, play there for how we kind of brand or communicate and enable these sorts of interventions. Maria, did you want to ask a question?
No, it was just more to add to this issue of branding and perceptions, because I have heard players say in focus groups that they get excited and rewarded somehow when they feel that their hardware is struggling, when they hear the fans come in and they hear and the thing heats up because they think, wow, this must be a great game because my machine is struggling with it. Then they get the opposite feeling when they upgrade their hardware and they go back and play an old game and they're like, oh, it's running so smoothly. But it's only in that situation, like it's playing an old game with new hardware and they're like, they can see the difference. But in normal circumstances, there is a whole bunch of players who feel this is a great thing. I must have bought a really great game. So I don't know how you have to address that separately.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The sort of the like cultural, because I can kind of understand it from the perspective of I want to get the most out of this expensive machine that I've put a lot of money into, and maybe it's meeting that need. But maybe there are other ways we can give that experience to players that don't like just straight up waste energy, or maybe we can construct a new expectation around it in some way. Yeah.
Perhaps a simple rebranding as an energy mode, energy saving mode instead of eco mode can communicate that better, or we display the energy usage of an option in the menu saying, hey, if you unlimit your FPS, you're going to drain more energy. Perhaps we can start with that.
Yeah, I think generally in most parts of the world, electricity costs are not, well, for the amount of energy that games use, unless you're running, say, dual 5090 GPUs or something, I think the energy consumption of gaming is, well, the electricity cost of gaming, I should say, is fairly minimal, but it's not zero, right? And I've noticed in the last couple of years seeing operating costs come into reviews of PC hardware, for instance. If anyone watches Linus Tech Tips, the YouTuber, they often in their reviews now will include like this is the projected operating cost of running this CPU or GPU or something, which I think is a really positive step, and might go some ways towards aligning players' interests with, energy saving. So, any questions from the audience, maybe? Did we want to, did anyone have anything to ask or suggest beyond what's kind of already been raised?
Hi. I would like to add a little bit because, we're talking a lot about optimizing games to kind of like, yeah, get the energy cost down. And sometimes that can be a hard sell for, not only the users, but also within your own team, especially for bigger companies. Like games are costing how much money right now? And then you're coming to your producer or, the team leader saying like, I want to spend how many man months on making these like economic, energy saving modes. And I think you can word it in a different way that does fit the goals of the project while also getting like the energy goals. For example, even if you're not doing it for energy savings or battery life, do it for your power users. Like you said, some people really like when their computers are screaming. You mentioned some people have screens that go 144 hertz or even more than 200 hertz. If you make it a goal for the team to make the game to be able to run on 200 hertz plus screens, you are actually optimizing it so that when it's being run on consoles or any other like modes where it does cap it to 60 frames per second, instead of using all of that, frame time, the, 16 milliseconds, you are only using a small slice of that. When it's running on mobile devices, if you're only, spending a small part of the frame time actually doing work, the rest of the frame time is the device not working and cooling down and being like, hey, I can actually run this at high frame rate. Like when you were running The Witcher at 500 frames per second, like that is a very optimized game that is like, oh wow, I can run it so much. So yeah, then you're basically getting both. You're getting the power user saying, oh my God, my computer can run this game at 200 frames per second and my computer is screaming. And then for most other people that you can cap it at 60 frames per second and then get the energy savings.
I like the idea of or the sort of incidental benefits that you gain by optimizing for that really high end of blazing fast FPS means that it then will be doing a lot less on lower hardware. Yeah, I haven't seen that kind of discussed anywhere.
It's
I
a
think
much easier sell to the team also.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I guess it's telling that when I first wrote about this topic, I named the blog post not optimizing energy consumption, but optimizing battery life, because I guess that's the mindset that you get when you're working at a games company, because oh, if I present to anyone, hey, you can reduce the energy efficiency, that's not really like that's not something that has any benefits perceived, like the way it's perceived. Improving battery life is already interesting because at least in the recent years, I think like in every game development team, like things like the Steam Deck are a topic, and like, oh, the Steam Deck, people are now playing on the go. They didn't do that before. Maybe that's something to optimize for. And I think Fortnite, for example, is a really good example for a game that runs on high-end machines, but also on mobile phones. And I think making sure that your game also runs well on mobile phones, for example, is always going to benefit also the high-end version, because you have to think about scalability in a completely different way. And I also think, I know that many people didn't like that Microsoft still uses the Xbox Series S, the small scale Xbox, but I think that it's actually helped players because it's this platform, it's this really small common denominator. Games still have to run on this low-end platform, and the effort that is needed to make that work also benefits the high-end platforms, because all these optimizations usually find their way also to the high-end platforms in one way or another.
Definitely. It's also a question of incentives. Like Microsoft basically says, like if you're going to make an Xbox game, it should run on both. And I keep hearing from developers because I work as technical developer relations engineer at Epic Games, so I talk to a lot of devs. And making sure that their game also runs on the Xbox Series S is always a major headache for them because they made it work on, Xbox Series X and PS5 and stuff. And then they're like, oh, now we have to start optimizing to make it also run on Xbox Series S. I think that's great because if they didn't have that, they wouldn't have put in the effort to optimize it down to that, which also benefits every other platform that the game runs on.
Yeah, another one of those nice kind of benefits that, I mean, it's great when we can identify that sort of synchronicity, right? Yeah, I think that's something we want to do in other sort of ways as well, to find things like, the benefit when you optimize for battery life, your players have a better experience as well. We can do that. Thanks again. Thanks for all your great questions and the great input. Thanks to our fantastic speakers. And we'll see you next time. Round of applause.